For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter.
Welcome back to Dunkin' Donuts here. Craig and I here alone at Dunks tonight.
Hello.
What do you want for a donut? What do you mean?
There's just that one guy.
I'll get you a donut.
I'm going to have a...
Yelling in the bathroom.
That's why I was echoing, see, because it was in the bathroom.
Oh, you're in the bathroom. I get it. So tonight, we're just solo tonight.
From the bathroom.
And we've had a lot of requests for, what Craig? We have a request for, how do we do speed painting? How do we paint?
Right. Well, apparently we talk a lot about painting models relatively quickly, and then somebody did a video on how to do it.
I did a video.
20 minutes. And how long did it take you to make that video?
It was a how to paint a model in 10 minutes. It was a 20-minute video
right, there you go.
on how to paint a model in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It was based on when we started.
Was your face ever in this video?
No, it's just my hands. You haven't watched it yet?
Good. You have hands for video, my friend. But
Actually,
you have a face for a podcast.
It's funny. I will admit this on the Lost Chapters. I've never understood men who want to get manicures or anything like that. You know, I'm just not a metrosexual. And as I'm watching my hands in this video, I'm like, dude, I really need a manicure. So, please forgive my lack of manicured thumbnails as you're watching that painting video. It is, if you're interested in watching that video, it is on Facebook. I posted it there because you can't post videos longer than 15 minutes on YouTube. So, so people were asking how we paint. Craig and I talk a lot about how we are, quote unquote, lazy painters. We just try to paint things as fast as possible.
Right.
Most of us have tried to paint competitively or really, really, really nice pieces before. And we do that when we feel like it. But a lot of times it's just like, I want to get something looking good on the table and not too worried about making it look great in a display case. Right.
Yeah.
So that's our approach. So Craig, when you start something like a new model, I mean, first of all, how do you decide whether you're going to actually just be a speed painter on this thing, or is it going to be,
Well, that's an interesting question because lately, especially with all the dust stuff, and I just did like an entire very large Uncharted Seas fleet in about 3 weeks.
Yes.
So, and that before that, actually, I did 2 enormous dystopian wars forces, land, sea, and air, all in about a month. So I've been doing a lot of painting, and I've done it a lot quickly. And I don't usually listen to podcasts or books on tape or anything when I'm painting. I kind of have TV on in the background, but I focus mostly on what I'm doing. And so I have a lot of time to think. And I was thinking that, like, I don't spend, like, literally, I was painting a model. And while I was painting the model, I was thinking, how in God's green earth did I ever win a bronze golden demon? Because like I literally, I'm looking at it, I'm like, the lines aren't straight, and it's god awful. It's like ridiculous according to my old standards, and I don't think I could do it anymore. And it's not a question of like my hands aren't shaking now, or I like lost my eyesight. I mean, my eyesight. I can't read it. And what is this? Bone bleach? What? What's going on?
Is that a belt pouch or his kneecap?
Exactly.
I can't quite tell.
Exactly. I have none of those problems. In fact, my eyesight is better than when I won the award because I got LASIK eye surgery. Oh, which would make another lost chapter. But anyway, that's a great story. Grosses everybody out.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah. And so it's just a question of I think I'm lazier. I know I'm more impatient, and I know I have much less time to paint. That's the key. That's what that was my final conclusion, is that I have so much less time to paint because of the baby. And one thing that even when you're saying, oh, like the baby, one thing they don't tell you is, oh, by the way, your wife's going to feel like she's being left out if you spend the free time that you'll have left after your baby just painting. So that cuts down even more. So it's not just the time with your baby that you're going to lose painting. So my technique has actually, I would say, with the advent of, I have no idea what the new GW paints are going to do. Okay, I have no idea how they're going to affect me. Whether I'm going to ignore them or just try to find the equivalent.
Now, have you
shades
tried them yet
going.
at all?
I have.
I have too, and I'm I'm actually pleasantly surprised by them.
I am pleasantly surprised with, except for the dry brushing stuff, which I think is just a question of a brand new technique that you have to get down before you ruin brushes. But and I'll talk about that in a second because that's going to be important. But no, I just mean there's so many more colors. Like I had a relatively limited palette that I would not stray very far from. I would say I could probably do almost everything I do in maybe 20 colors.
Right.
And then I would maybe, if I wanted an accent color or something like that, I would go out and get another one. But literally, I mean, I got a couple of grays, I got a couple greens, I got a couple browns, that are my go-to shades.
Right.
And then I got a lighter gray that I use to mix the grays up and down. I have a light, like the bleached bone is what I use to mix most colors up and down.
Right.
And so now with all of that gone and their color range is now like triple or quadruple what it used to be.
Right? It's crazy.
Like I don't want to go buy. I mean, this stuff costs $4 a jar. I don't want to buy $12 worth of paint for one color. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know how it's going to affect mine. But
you probably have plenty of old paints left. And there's also plenty of lines now to look at the different paint lines. I mean, I miss all of them.
And every store that carries GW paint is desperate to get rid of the old colors.
Right. So they're good.
So right now they're dirt cheap.
Right.
So I got a bunch of those. I'm stockpiling. But so I'm painting and I realized that I need to. I'm getting frustrated because I'm not getting as much painted as I need to get painted in the amount of time I have left now. So let's say like I had 2 days this week to paint and it wasn't happening fast enough. And Karen would come home and she'd be like, "Hey, are we like hanging out? We're going to watch some TV." And I was like, yep. I just got to finish this thing that I thought I was going to be done with 3 hours ago. And so my techniques have actually accelerated since this whole the baby and everything else. So I think the question is, it's a question of how fast can I go versus the outcome that I want. And I think objectively looking at the Thaneris elves, which are the last things that I painted, and I just finished them during my lunch actually on Tuesday. Which is another thing I never did before.
Paint on lunch.
Paint during lunch. I think they look really good from far away. I mean, up close, I'm going, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Right. But it's a question of like needing to get a whole, like I want to do this, I want to do dystopian, I want to do dust, I want to have, I have a bunch of stuff for gut shot that I need to get done before we play Deadlands again.
Right. So
like literally, I'm doing too much. And then I don't have nearly as much time as I used to have to paint. So that's my theory on why I have to paint faster. What have you always painted fast?
No, I haven't. I used to actually. It's funny because I remember back when I first started doing painting seriously in the 90s. I remember I was like, I don't know why people buy all these colors. I'm going to get the 4 or 7 primary colors or 8, however many there are, and a few extras, and I mix every color myself. It's awesome. No two things look the same. It's awesome. And I painted my whole Man of War fleet back then, like meticulously with every color mixed. The Bretonian yellow was just a certain shirt and shade I mixed, and I had a blast doing it. And I stretched it out for I don't know how long it took me to do it. Now I couldn't even imagine doing that. It's like I don't even want to mix paint anymore. I'm like, I want to have the 3 shades of brown for that, and I want to have the 3 shades of red and and so I'm totally. Just because of the time it takes to mix, I try to avoid mixing now. But I'm the same way. I pretty much I'm either painting a centerpiece model, and it's really the only thing on my plate, and that's what I'm painting, like a Warcaster or a big Warjack or a big centerpiece boat for Dystopian Wars or something, or I'm in crank it out mode. There's no longer a time for me where I want my infantry. Back when I painted my Imperial Guard, also a long time ago, each guy was having all his eyes were done, and he had 3 shades on his gun and all this stuff. Not anymore. It's you're either an infantry grunt, in which case you're assembly line painting, basically by me, or you're the centerpiece model of 2 or 3, and you're going to get a really careful treatment. I don't really, just because the same thing. It's too much time. I don't have that much time to devote to just painting anymore, which is sad, I guess. But I still like painting, and it's very cathartic for me. So I don't want to not paint. It's just I do it for different reasons now, I guess, because it's still. still I get that great, fantastic, visceral feel of when my models are painted on the table. I've discovered, I guess also I've learned that even if they're just tabletop quality or speed painting quality, I really like them. You know what I mean? Like I like how it looks on the table still, and it's still worth doing for me.
Yeah.
So it's not like I don't want people to think I do it just to rush it or just because I feel like I have to. I enjoy it, and I love the feel of when they're done. But I've discovered this about myself. I am just as satisfied at the end if I've painted them quickly to tabletop quality as I would have been if I tripled the time and tried to make them look amazing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I think I'll go back to something that I told Rafe when he first started his first Imperial Guard army, which was he was feeling frustrated because he had so much to paint. Yeah. And I made an observation a long time ago that especially with one of those games where you've got a lot of models on the board, uniformity and completeness is what makes that army look great.
Right.
So you don't have to have every model is going to be like Golden Demon level, or Crystal Brush level or whatever.
Right.
If everything is uniform and it's all done to a decent level, but they all look nice together. When you see them all those guys painted up and they're all on the board, that's when it really starts to kick in. And that's when I think I get the most payoff, when I have that whole force on the table and it looks really nice and it looks uniform and everybody looks like they match. And so what you learn, or what I learned, is that you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours on every model if they all look nice as a group.
Right.
You know
I think
what
that's
I mean?
the key. And I think it's a good segue into some of the tricks that I know both you and I use to when we start.
Right.
I think you mentioned, there's a uniformity and a clearness of look. And I think the key to making your army look good on the table is to think about in your head, okay, or look at the models when you're trying to decide, okay, what am I going to pick out to make this model look good? And what parts of the model am I going to spend time on? And what parts of the model am I going to kind of, just kind of dry brush over or whatever? It really comes down to what defines this model. What do I want to have be the definition of this piece? Is it the fact that when you're first looking at the bottle that's been primed or maybe just base coated, does his gun need to jump out and you have to be able to see from far away that he's carrying a gun? Is that important? Then yes, then I've got to make sure if I'm painting Space Marines, if they're all blue, the gun can't be blue too. The gun's got to be a nice different color, like black or something, right? What define, or maybe I want to have blue and red guys, so I want to do their shoulder pads all red and their bodies all blue. If I just do that, that's really going to snap a pattern to the whole army. You know what I mean? So you got to kind of, do you do that? You kind of figure out what is going to be sort of the hallmark of this force, and that's what you focus on? Well,
and I think we've covered this a little bit in the live show, but it's nice to have this all done in one place. My technique actually kind of takes care of that for me. I always prime in black, and we actually locally got into a huge email fight in our big email group this past week over what color to prime in, because especially with Dust and a bunch of people getting into Dust for the first time as a mini game, and I think there's 2 or 3 guys who are going to paint their some board game models for the first time. So we literally had 3 or 4 guys. They're like, I've never painted before. What should I do? Where should I start? And the first person who popped on was like, prime in white.
Oh, here we go.
And I'm like,
it's a religious war, people.
That's like, that's like going, break the egg at the big end. I mean, You can't do that. You can't clearly you want to go to war with Lilliput, then that's the one way to do it. And so I jumped in there, and lately I have not. Lately, both on the email and on various forums, when I see somebody who says something I vehemently disagree with, unless they're attacking someone or doing something that I think I can step in and maybe either point something out or worst case scenario, there's a guy on the Dust forums who is making amazing unit cards.
Yes, he is doing a great job.
He's doing an amazing job. Yeah. What's that?
Fantastic job. They look amazing.
An absolutely fantastic job. In fact, he is a listener. I don't know if he listens to the
but FFG, if you're listening, don't shut him down. Just quietly accept his work and, pay him a couple $100 and take them in and make them your own. They're fantastic.
Right. Yeah. His name's Rodney.
Yes.
And he has been doing a great job. And one of the many things that he's doing that's awesome is that he has the special rules actually written on the card, including the special rules for the weapons.
Right.
Which is huge. If you've listened to Russ and I talk about Dust over the last several episodes, that's one of the huge fails in the Dust rulebook is you've got to flip constantly to look in 3 different places for rules. So there's a big thread that's all supportive, and oh my god, they literally FFG could do as well. So if you're listening, FFG, this is not a diss, but they could not do better than what this guy has come up with.
Just let him do it for you and send him a free game or something and hook him up.
Exactly. I mean, the aesthetic is amazing. The detail is amazing. Everything gels. It's awesome. And he's got all the detail, all the information right there. And then somebody out there doesn't get it because somebody posted on the forum, dude, all you got to do is put like the keyword and then the page that it's on.
No.
And I normally, like I said, lately I've just been avoiding conflict. I jumped in and I was like, please, for the love of God, don't do that. This is exactly why we need these cards. The last thing we want is for you to go see page da-da-da because page da-da-da leads you to page da-da-da, which leads you to play page. I mean, for the love of all that is holy, Rodney. And of course, he got it. I mean, he emailed me right back when he saw that it was me right in there. And he was like, oh, don't worry. It's funny. Like, he was very positive about the guys, the guy's feedback, and he wasn't negative at all. He was kind of like, it's obvious sometimes there's some people who just don't quite get what you're trying to do, and so I don't usually comment on stuff. But with this thing about suggesting to a new painter that they prime in white,
that is not a speed painting tip.
No,
that is a pro painting tip.
That's right.
Right.
You do not prime in white and speed paint anything.
No, you do not.
Okay. In fact, you only prime in white if you want the finished product of that model to be really bright.
Right. That's right.
Okay. If you want to do like a knight where his surcoat is quartered white and red or something like that, you might prime in. I would not. To tell you that I have primed in white. I've gone through phases. I've primed in. I spent years priming in white. I spent years priming in gray. I started and ended in black.
Right.
For reasons I'll tell you in a second. But the priming in white, nothing shades. In the real world, there is no white in shadow.
Right.
Okay. So once you're done painting, if you have primed in white, you have painted every little micro millimeter of that model because you cannot leave any of the crevices or creases behind. You have to paint everything.
If you remember nothing else about speed painting tips from this episode, remember this. The fastest way to paint is prime in black.
That's right.
Period. End of story. No discussion.
Yeah, exactly. So what you're going to do, and so I jumped in there and I was like, you can't do that. And then this one guy in particular, who's a very nice guy, and I like him. He's a friend. But he was like, well, you can't get the nice vibrant colors. And look, I'll give you a little cheat later on in this episode on how to get you the nice vibrant colors and still prime in black. But so anyway, so you prime in black. Then what I do is I take a nice neutral light tone, like a beige, or the GW color I've always used is bleached bone. God only knows what it's going to be now.
Any light gray will work also.
Light gray will work. And what you're going to do is you're going to dry brush it. So teaching you a technique over an audio medium is difficult if you don't already know what dry brushing is. But dry brushing is basically you just put you need a relatively big brush. GW tank brushes used to work. They don't sell those anymore. There are lots of you can go to there's a Hobby Lobby that just opened up here, and honestly, except for my fine detail brushes, I get all my brushes from there.
And
now.
Here's the thing about dry brushing: you don't really need a special brush labeled dry brush.
Exactly.
It's just that once you start using a brush as dry brushing, that's really all it's good for.
Right.
Because dry brushing, because you're going to brush like crazy on it, as the word sounds, you're going to destroy the tip of that brush.
Right. You're going to destroy its definition.
Just when you get a dry brush, it's often handy to get a different colored handle or just mark it in some way so you remember that's my dry brush. And you don't keep picking up other brushes to dry brush. It's very tempting to take one of your good brushes and just a quick dry brush with it, and as soon as you do that, you pretty much ruin the brush. Right. So don't do that. Yep. But here's my tip for even an audio medium to dry brush. What I like to do is I always work with paper towels. So put a paper towel down on the table, dip your brush in the paint a little bit, wipe the edge off on the edge of the cap or whatever you do. Then dry brush on the towel until pretty much you start to see the pattern of the towel. You know, there's like a pattern on the towel. When you dry brush light, you actually see the pattern, and it's almost like the color's only getting the top of the pattern. And when that starts to happen, you're pretty close to being able to dry brush. And then you're going to basically lightly brush the model. And what's going to happen is it's only going to pick the top parts of the model. I know we've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. It's going to pick up only the top levels of detail of the model, and it's not really brushing on the model. There's no actual brush strokes appearing. If you just do it, all of a sudden you'll see these little, the detail will just start showing up. And that's basically all there is to it.
Yeah. Yeah, you get almost all the paint off. of the brush, and then you're just lightly generally going against the grain or across the details, so that it's just leaving a little bit of paint behind. What happens then is all of the detail on your model is now picked out. So that you can just look at the model and you can say, oh, there's a belt pouch. That's his, that's his knee pad, whatever. Oh my God, there are goggles on that model. I mean, and the more detailed the model is, the better this technique works, because every little piece of detail that's actually been sculpted into the model is actually going to pop out at you.
Now, what's cool about this technique too is if the model happens to be primarily black, like let's say you're dry brushing a guy who's wearing black armor or a black jerkin, the black stuff is essentially done at this point.
Right.
It looks pretty good. And you're like, whoa, I can see his buttonholes on his leather jerkin, and I can see his sleeves where his sleeves end and his arms begin now. And now it's very easy for you to start saying, okay, now what do I got a base coat? Now I can see all the parts of the model. What do I really need to base coat? So you can tell this is not just I missed a section, right? So if let's say you're painting a guy in like a leather jerkin, like I said, with exposed arms, and he's got like some tights on, some pants, and you're okay. I got to paint his skin. If I don't paint his skin, it's going to look weird. So you're going to paint his arms, paint his face, right? And at this point, even now, if you paint his arms and paint his face, just base coat him. All of a sudden, hey, he's got black hair, so that's done. You could say, right? Or you paint it brown. His arms are done. The miniature's is getting pretty close, and now you're going to after you do the flesh, we'll go with some flesh tricks in a minute. After the flesh is done, now it's just, okay, what parts of the model should I paint? Was he holding a sword? Well, that can't be black. That should probably be silver. Okay, I'll paint that bulk on metal or something. And now the model is like looking pretty good. He's got some skin. He's got a face. He's got a sword all base coated. And now it's just how do you finish that stuff out, and how much more do you want to pick out before you're going to call that guy done, right?
Right, exactly. And that's basically it. What you've done with this technique, you've done all your shading already. So you don't have to worry about any, like Russ said, the buttonholes, the creases, the crevices. Those are already taken care of. When you dry brush, a little pigment will get in there, which will actually be even better. And then one way to do it when you're doing your if you even want to cut out even more steps is you use a watered down paint for your base coat, and what actually happens is those dark creases and crevices in the fabrics and the cloth and everything actually stay dark because they're letting a little bit of the black through. And you've actually shaded your whole model as you're painting.
Yeah, what you can do, and this is a good tip, Craig, like you don't put a lot of paint on your base coat brush. Like go in either watered down or if you're painting like the flesh over the black and it's not really covering well, that may be okay because the higher section is getting more paint on him, and his crevice of his arm or the edges of his muscles may look a little darker, and you're going to be fine. What you can actually do if you want to be a little fancier but it's still fast is base coat his arm with that flesh color, and it's not going to cover well. Okay, it's going to cover everything, but you're going to see some black that's going to be too dark. Then hit his arm with a dry brush of the same flesh you just base coated it with, and that dry brush will pick up the highlights, and those will become the color of the paint. The lower areas will still be that flesh color, but there'll be a darker shade because it didn't cover well, and you got some okay tone shading going on there very, very quickly, very rapidly, right?
Exactly. And so if you've done all that, and literally that's going to take you just a few minutes per model. I mean, it may, it depends on how detailed you want to get with your base coating, but once you've done that, okay, then to me, and this is where I'm saying that my technique has evolved because of GW's own evolution, is that then I use washes, and what the washes do is actually blend the shading even better, so that now it's not such a harsh differentiation between the highs and the lows. It kind of blends everything together. It gives great definition to faces. And it works great on metals because it'll actually go into the creases and crevices where the different pieces of like working machinery and things like that will go in, and it actually dulls the metal down a little bit, so it actually it doesn't really look like non-metallic metallic, which is something you'd have to look up online to even look at what it sees. It looks a tiny little bit like it.
Yeah, not a fast technique, so that won't be covered here.
No, I've never been able to figure it out.
Well, washes are a great example of my super fast. How I like to paint flesh quickly and faces quickly, which I showed in my little video. And what I do, because even in the video, even though the dust model is pre-painted green, I decided that picking out the flesh was key because they're wearing this green armor, which is fine, but I wanted to pick out the flesh. So I painted the face, the flesh tone, and then as Craig said, I ink it. And I just basically, with inks, you just take dip your brush in the ink pot, and then you're going to and inks are just very, very thinned paints, right? when you put the ink on something, it runs all over the place. Be very careful with it. It goes crazy. So try to have not too much on your brush. But get enough on there, and you'll see when you put it on the face, all of a sudden his eye sockets get full of the ink, and his cheekbones get some definition, and his mouth gets lined with the ink. So basically I just kind of go over his whole face, and now all of a sudden his face has gone from just plain boring flesh tone to this sort of, and I usually ink, by the way, flesh with like a chestnut ink or a light brown ink. And what will end up happening is he'll look like he's got a really bad tan. And so it's all going to be this dark. Then you let that ink dry, and then you dry brush his face again with the same flesh tone you did the base coat. And now, boom, the tip of his nose is now nice and white again, but the edges of his nostrils have that dark ink in there, and it's going to really make his nose jump out. It's going to make his mouth have definition. His cheeks are going to have definition. His eyes will be nice and dark if you don't have to bother painting the eyes, unless it's heroic scale. And so you can get a really, really quick paint job on the face with base coat, ink, dry brush. And it actually has some nice definition, but it's a really simple technique.
Yeah, and it looks great. And I will throw in for free how to do eyes relatively quickly.
There you go, yeah.
Except that you need to have a steady hand and you need to have a really small brush. The key is you're going to need black and white, and you're going to have it so neither of them are chunky. White quite often chunks up on almost every manufacturer. So you're going to want to make sure ahead of time before you start this that it's nice, and shake it, listen to it, make sure that it's fluid. Same thing with the black. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take line up all the models that you've got. And this is why it's fast. Let's say like you're doing a squad at a time, which is the least I usually do. And so let's say you've got 10 models. You're going to pick them up, and you're just going to do a streak of black across the eye socket, not going too far, not starting too far out at the corner of the eye, not going into the nose, just going to leave like a black little slash. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're going to do that in every eye. And literally, it's like wish one way direct, wish one way, wish the other way, wish one way, wish the other way. You're going from the outside in, and you're just literally, here's one model, boom, boom. Here's another model, boom, boom. Here's another model, boom, boom. Here's another model, boom, boom. And you've done all 10. Then you got to be. You have to be careful, like I said. But then what you're going to do, and you have to practice and get like the thickness of that dash has to be right. Eventually, either practice or you might have to go over it a couple times to get the width right, the thickness right. And then you're going to do the same thing with the white, leaving just the slightest little outline of black, like eyeshadow.
Right.
And you're going to do that with all of them. And that once you get proficient with this, it happens exactly the same speed. So black, white, now you've got eyeballs that are a little outlined in black.
Let me ask you this. Does making the sound effect help it?
It absolutely does.
Okay,
and that's why I can't listen to anything else, because I'm constantly... This is me painting one model. Ready?
Right.
Okay, so that's why I can't listen.
This is me painting a model. It's like this. Dry brush. Oh, that's looking so cool. Dry brush. Oh, look at that gun. Dry brush. That's how I work.
There you go. Okay. Well, I mean, we all work different ways.
Right.
And then what you're going to do is you're going to put a little vertical line in the middle that's going to look like an eyeball, and that's all it's going to be. And you've got to make sure that they look like they're looking straight ahead, or if you want it to look in one direction or the other, that they're both looking in the same direction.
Yes.
Okay, and that's a huge problem and it happens to me all the time when like one eye's looking up and one eye's looking down, and then you've got to go back and fix
the other trick too is when you make that vertical line, I don't know if you do this correct, but I always make the line from the top of the white to the bottom of the white. I never just make it a dot in the middle of the white.
No, yeah, because that makes them look afraid.
They look like they're afraid if the dots in the middle. So you really, you feel like you're making a cat's eye, but really at this scale, you don't.
Right, exactly. That's why I say it's a line. You're basically connecting the upper little black line with the lower little black line with a line in the middle.
Right.
And there are other people who I've seen do it this way. You do the black, start with the black again, and then they just do a little white dot on either side, on either corner of the eye.
Yeah, that takes
so
more
that
accuracy.
That can work good. That can work well too. But so that's literally how to get this done in a relatively short amount of time with these techniques, and that's how. I mean, with these Thaneris elves. The funny thing is, with the Thaneris elves, I had to use them as I was painting them, which is also something that is neat with dust, that you can kind of paint it and use it as you go, because they're all.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because people asked me too about my video when they saw me painting and just holding the base. They were saying things like, "Oh, I like to mount my models on a piece of cork or glue them to something so I can hold them easier," and that's all true. When I'm working on a centerpiece model, I will glue it to the top of an old paint pot or blue tack it to the top of an old paint pot or something. But as Craig was suggesting earlier, when you're painting a lot of models, if you are are doing one, if you have, let's say you got 10 of these British paratroopers to do, and they've all got red hats, and they've all got their faces, and they all got the inking to do, and I would take one paratrooper, open up the red, put the red on his cap, close the red, paint his face with brown, close the brown, ink his face, wait for it to dry. No, that's not how you do it. You get your 10 guys out, you open the red up, red for the first guy's cap, done. Next guy, red his cap, done. Next guy, red his cap, done. Get all 10 red hats done. Close the red, put it away, clean your brush. Good.
Right.
Now we're going to do flesh. First guy's face, done. Second guy's face, done. Third guy's face. That's the way you paint 10 guys quickly, and that's how all of a sudden it takes you 45 minutes, but 10 guys are done, right? Or 10 guys are really close to being done. Now, the key to that for me, though, is when I'm doing that kind of painting, I don't bother trying to mount them to something because then I need 10 ways to mount them. And I don't know about you, Craig, but that's just too more work for me. So for those kind of speed painting, I'm just holding the base of the model and going. Are you that
to
way?
be honest, I've actually never mounted any of my models like that. I always paint right from the base.
Yeah, I do.
I have gone through phases where I paint on the sprue.
Yes, yeah.
But then you've got all kinds of little cut spaces and little scrape marks that you've got to paint again, and that's just annoying.
Painting before assembly is one of those big debates, and I sometimes I like to. There's some models you have to, like when you get into some really big stuff, like my Strider for War Machine. Obviously, can't have the guy standing on the walkway there not painted before you put him on the walkway. So that kind of stuff happens.
Right.
But the problem with painting on a sprue is you get into the problem with when you're gluing it all together at the end, the paint is covering the contact points, and you get. So two things happen. First, you got to scrape it off sometimes to get a good connection. And the second thing that happens is you realize all the time you spent painting certain areas of the model is totally obscured when you put the arms on.
Right.
So it's like, then you realize, why did I waste all that time? So really, the other thing about the speed painting technique, which is assemble first, then prime, then dry brush, then base coat, then whatever finishing you want to do, that technique, you really are only painting what you need to paint.
Right. That's a good little side note there is when I painted my first ever Warhammer Fantasy Empire army, my centerpiece model was a warrior priest who had a big holy book, and the holy book I painted that model separately. I painted him on the sprue because it was a big plastic conversion, and he was holding a huge book. And so I painted the book separately. And I painted the book freehand, the exact copy of the cover of the Warhammer rulebook.
That's right. I remember
and
that.
It was awesome. And everybody was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. Before I put the model together. Because when I put the model together, you couldn't see the cover of the book at all. And how bitter was I for the rest of the time I used that model, where I would literally show people like, look, if you hold it this way to the light and then tilt the model and then you hold it upside down, you can just kind of make out the Warhammer. And people would be like, "Oh yeah, I bet that's cool."
I bet that took a lot of work.
Yeah. So this technique, these speed painting techniques that Russ and I are talking about, exactly as Russ says, you paint what you need to paint, and you don't waste time painting stuff that's going to get obscured by other parts of the model.
Now, as we're running out of time here, let's talk a bit about basing.
Yeah.
Because this is a funny story about basing. So it used to be that Craig used to never base his models.
Never.
Back in the day. But Craig spent has always been a fantastic painter. And I was aspired to be as good as Craig was. And Craig would do these great jobs painting. And I would just be okay painting, but I'd always base my guys because I could do that. So I put the base on there and I had some little grass on there and my bases. And I would always tease him. He'd be like, look at my great model. I said, yeah, but mine don't have bases. Look how uniform my guys are. Look, they all match. They match the grass they're on.
Hey, my guys match. I just painted the bases goblin green.
Right, they'd be goblin green. And so after a while, he started basing them. And since then, we both have never looked back. I think basing brings a finished look to your army that even if you do these speed painting techniques, if you have speed painted your models and based them, and someone else has spent a lot more time on their models, but hasn't even finished their bases and have left the brushstrokes on there and stuff, your army's going to look so much better and more cohesive on the tabletop because it just brings an extra little bit of togetherness to your army, looks great, adds a little more realism. And also, getting that paint on the base makes the figure jump off the base a little more. It makes them look more dynamic and independent of what they're stuck to. So I think it really adds a lot of depth to your army, and yet it doesn't take that much work to base a model.
No, I think, I was just lazy. I knew Russ was right, but I always felt like, come on, I've spent days on this one model. I don't want to spend another hour on the basing, to the point where I literally would paint it with the green paint and then say, but look, the base, like the old GW bases had little pebbly, like the surface was like a lid, very slightly textured and like a little pebbly texture. I would be like, look, that looks good, because I would dry brush it with a little bit
with
of
a big slot in there, and I'd be like filling my slots in and covering them with glue.
Hey, now I never just put a slot of base up there with a big hole on it. Give me some. I would cover that with paper. But it's really, really easy to base a model.
It is.
All you need is some white glue, Elmer's glue, DIY glue across the pond. Okay, whatever you want to use. And you're going to need a brush. And again, this is a brush that's probably not going to be worth much for anything else once you use it this way.
The glue brush.
Yeah, you're just going to put a few daubs of glue, little blobs of glue around the base. And of course, you've already glued and in my case, green stuffed your base so that your model and your base are not needing this white glue to hold.
Now, ideally, so here's one quick tip: when do you do the basing of the model and get the gravel on there? Now, if you're gonna, because there's two choices for basing, right? Well, there's several different ways you can base, but you could go with like some kind of lichen fuzzy base, or you can go with painted gravel, painted ballast basically. With added static grass and other stuff. I've used to use the fuzzy stuff, flock, right? I used to use flock.
Yeah.
But now I've since moved to painted gravel because it's more durable and I think it looks cooler and you can do more stuff with it. Yeah. So if you're going the gravel route, do you glue gravel, then prime the whole model? Or do you prime the whole model and then later glue and gravel?
I do everything at once. So I put the model together, I put on the glue, I gravel it, I let it all dry, then I prime it.
That's the best way to do it, because painting over that gravel and getting a solid color over it is a pain in the butt.
Yes.
So now I'm often finding myself too lazy to do that. I'll prime the model, I want to get some painting on it, and then I base some models later. It's just a lot more work. So Craig has definitely got the right technique there. It's the right way to do it. While you're assembling your models, go ahead, take the extra time, get that glue brush out. All you do is paint the base with the glue and have a very shallow little dish next to you and pour some of the ballast. You can get it from a lot of places. Train stores have it. You can get it at hobby stores. The GW stuff's much more expensive. You can get a huge bag of the train stuff that'll never run out basically for you for whatever. You can mix, if you want to get fancy, you can mix the different grains together, have the really, really fine, mix them with bigger rocks.
I would recommend you not mix them all together before using them, that you have them store them separately.
That's what I do.
Put them on differently, because what happens when you mix them all together for storage is the heavier pieces will go down to the bottom just like it's a liquid, and you'll be like digging through the lighter stuff, try to find it's just a pain in the butt.
No, good tip. Well, yeah, I keep them stored separately as well, but in my little shallow bowl, I'll mix a little bit of all of them together.
Right.
Shake it around a little bit, and then all you do is put the glue on the base, dip the base into the bowl, shake it off, and now it's covered with rocks. Put that one aside. He's done. Next, go through your little list of 10 guys or how many you're doing. Now, the downside is you got to wait for that white glue to dry. It does take some time.
Yeah.
So when you're basing, and you can't prime with wet glue on the bottom, so you really got to wait for that to cure up, and white glue takes overnight.
I make sure that's the last thing I do in my day, and then the next time I go to those models, that's when I'll be priming them.
And then you just paint the base. After everything's primed, you paint the base like you paint the guy. You can dry brush the rocks to make with a light gray, and there you go. You can get a little more fancy with it and kind of get some wetter paint in there to get between the rocks, and then dry brush them light. Whatever you want to do, paint them green like it's grass. Excuse me. Whatever you want to do there. And then I like to kick it up a little bit with some static grass. I think Craig does the same thing also with static grass, right?
Sometimes. It depends. Sometimes I want to go for like a field look, which I'm gonna paint it all brown, dry brush it with a lighter brown, and then I'm gonna flock most of the whole thing with static grass.
Right.
And then other times I'm gonna do it brown. I'm gonna do little tufts of static grass.
Yep.
Or lately I've been doing desert. So desert usually with no static grass. So it depends, but static grass is an awesome effect.
It is. It gives a little bit of color. You don't have to do the whole base. Just do like a little. What you do is after everything's dry, and static grass goes on at the end because you don't really paint it. Although you can paint it. I've seen people do some really interesting techniques with painting it, but it's green already. So all you really do with static grass is after the model's pretty much done, the base is all painted, whatever color you want, it's dry. Get that glue brush again, Elmer's glue brush. Put a couple dabs of Elmer's or what do they call it in England? It's not Elmer's glue, whatever the white glue is. And you dab a couple little spots on your base, little tiny dots here and there, and then again sprinkle the static grass on top of it. Tap the model off. The static grass is called static grass because static electricity will make it kind of stand up. And you'll have these little tufts of grass on your base. And even if it's a gray, rocky base, it'll look like little bits of grass are sticking out. It gives the base a lot of nice texture, adds a little color. Very simple to do, and I think you'll really like the technique. And there's all kinds of great things you can glue to your bases, but for speed painting, that's kind of where I stick. And then for like a centerpiece model or for some cool solo sniper, I might add some of they call it the horsehair, the long, thin bristle hair. stick it on there like you're standing in the weeds. You can do all kinds of crazy things, but the static grass is pretty much where I stop on the mass produced stuff. What do you think, Craig? Is that what you pretty much where you end?
No, yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I've been doing 40K and fantasy models for so long. I have an entire workstation for basing that's just got all kinds of little bits and pieces from models that I've been working on for decades, and I've got like skulls and pieces of armor and weapons, and I love putting little details like that on the bases to really make them pop. And I have entire 40K armies, very large 40K armies, where every model and every base has been customized in some way with little bits and pieces. But now putting together all of my dust model basing stuff, I looked at that and I was like, oh, I can't do any of this stuff because it's all like screams 40K or fantasy. Right. So there are other companies, however, that make different things that you can use for basing. You can use if you're doing not dystopian wars, that would be ridiculously off scale. But if you're doing any kind of steampunk stuff, you can get watch pieces off of eBay and have little gears and stuff on the ground.
Yeah,
little details like that will really make a model pop. Yep. And I think it really looks cool when it's done because it'll look like these rusty little bits. And especially if you put a little static grass around them after the fact. Liquid effects, you can get. GW used to have an awesome product called Water Effects that they don't sell anymore, but other companies do have similar products, which are literally, they look like white glue. You pour them in and they dry clear in a little like puddle, so you could actually have like water on the base and different things like that. And I just think if you really want your models to pop, that's the kind of stuff that you do after the fact, but that's not really that sort of brings it out of the speed painting realm. Although most of these things are relatively quick. Well,
I think what it does is interesting is if you do that to speed paint a model, suddenly when someone looks at your army on the table, the army just looks that much more really well done. Even though it's just one more layer of something fast you can do to bring your army just to look a little nicer and a little more have a little pop on the table, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to go that far. You can stop with just like my dust guys right now. I'm just stopping with their green bases, but I'm probably going to do something to their bases once I get everything else done to give my army a unique flavor. So the dunk guys is giving us an evil eye here, but let me just sum up. Ready? So let's see if I got this right, Craig.
Yeah.
Prime in black. Step 1.
Oh, absolutely.
Step 2. Dry brush the entire model in some kind of gray or light off-white color, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Step 3. Identify the parts of the model you absolutely must base coat, like flesh and weapons, and do that.
Yeah.
Step 4, ink where you gotta, which is basically, again, we talked about weapons and flesh. Maybe another dry brush on top of that when you're done to kind of bring out the highlights. And step 5, do the eyes if you need to. If it's like with a dust scale, you don't have to because the sockets are so small. It's like
exactly, and they're all squinty because they look more real than like 4K and fantasy.
Step 6, base it and you're done essentially, or pick out over the details you think you need because basically at this point you're done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's it. And you can paint about 10 models in an hour if you're doing something like that. You can get through a lot of guys if you're and then you can decide. You know what's great about this technique too is if you paint the 10 models. And you're happy with it, you get them table quality, you can always go back and add more detail later. Nothing stops you from doing more and more and just kind of adding more and more and say, today I'm going to do all their belt buckles. Right. And tomorrow, and then you just slowly add detail to your army over time, and eventually you can get as fancy and detailed as you like.
Exactly. Although you should know that once you start using them on a regular basis, you could rub the paint off or chip it at some point. You're going to want to you're going to want to spray coat it at some point.
And when you do that, you kind of are
coat it. And once you've done that, you're pretty much done with the model.
Yeah, so get them to the point where you're feeling comfortable. But
this technique will work with war games. It'll work with board games. That was another question because like some guys on the email were like, well, what if it's a board game? Well, in general, the plastic used on board games is softer and more rubbery. Other than that, everything works exactly the same.
And this is Romeo's concern. It's funny because in our dust episode, this was Romeo's big concern with dust, that, they're a little softer and bendier than the plastics and metals and GW and Privateer and stuff. But you know what? I haven't really experienced the problems he's had with bendy plastics before. And also, I thought of this after that show, but the demo pieces they had there were being demoed all weekend long.
And not only that, but those demo pieces were the demo pieces we were demoing at Gen Con. And they're the ones that are in the rule book.
So I think if you treat your models with care, i.e. you prime them right, you paint them right, and then you seal them properly, I think that even the board game ones will hold up very nicely. So I don't know that's a big deal.
The key is sealing ultimately.
Yeah, I think it really is. And storage, you want to store them some way they're not going to get beat up too much. But anyway, all right. So
and that's speed painting.
Speed painting. Hopefully,
it gets.
There you go. So good luck. Go out there, paint something, and let us know what you think. Send your pictures to info@d6generation.com or post them on our Facebook page. Share what you've done. We'd love to see it.
Right. We always love seeing you guys work.
All right, and I'm out of here. I'm going to get one more crawler for the road, though. The chocolate one's been sitting there.
Oh, they were out last time I looked.
I know. I'm getting one. I'll buy you one. Here, I'll get you one.
Okay. Pick me up a crawler.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.
My name is Craig. I like eating eggs. I don't like fag, but I like to wig.
Fag?
I don't
Really?
Yeah, I got nothing. I can't freestyle. I know I can't freestyle. I always admitted I couldn't freestyle.
Yeah.
Freestyle and basketball, two things I'm really, really, really bad at.
All right. I think we're good.
But I could lay down some righteous beats in the background.
They're righteous. They're righteous. Good.